How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I've got a very special guest for you all. This guest was actually one of the very first guests that I had on the podcast, all the way back in episode 47. The game day coaching wizard, some may say, and also the author of his latest ebook, Game Day Coaching Manual. Today, I am joined by the one and only Matt Gary. How are you doing?
Outstanding. Thank you so much for having me back on, Stephen. It's an honor.
No worries at all. I know obviously it's been a while since we last spoke. You know, a lot of things have happened since then. But how are you? What's been happening in your world? What have you been up to?
I'm doing great, man. Life is good. I'm blessed. Yeah, since we last spoke, a lot has changed, right? I moved all the way across the United States as we were chatting before we came on air, which is good. So I've transitioned from the East Coast of the United States, from Maryland, all the way over to Montana, where the air is clean, the spaces are wide open. There's fewer people. I can run free. It's just it's been a wonderful and welcome change. Montana checks all the boxes for my wife Susie and I. And yeah, in terms of the powerlifting landscape, I guess kind of like you said, I took the time to sit down and put fingers to keys, if you will, pen to paper, and craft this game day coaching manual, which has kind of been on my heart and mind for quite some time. And so that's been really exciting. And it's just awesome to see the growth of the sport and to see it explode, and just the talent pool continue to get deeper and deeper, which I think, I'm sure we'll talk about that more in our conversation. It's just truly a sport now. This is not a hobby for most people. This is truly an endeavor that people throw a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of passion behind. And I'm just excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, oh, nice. And with that as well, because obviously, I mean, it wasn't so long ago. Obviously there was Sheffield, straight around the corner was World. I think it was the most lifters at Worlds this year's.
Yeah, that's right. For a classic worlds, and in the open category, this was the most. So, they used to. I know, I guess Raw Worlds as we know it kind of got its genesis in 2012 when they kind of did a test drive with the Raw World Cup. And I was fortunate enough to be there in Sweden. But for lack of a better word, that was a true Raw World Championships. It just was smaller. And then, so we've had this thing going on now for 11 years. And at times they've included the masters and the sub juniors and the juniors all together. And now, of course, they've divided that into separate championships. But yeah, to your point, this has been the largest as far as the open category. And I think just as time progresses, obviously with the coverage and social media exposure and so forth, it's just been this explosion, both literally and figuratively. And so it's huge now. A lot more eyeballs are on the sport. A lot of people are paying attention, and that's good. Yeah, that helps.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
how did you find? Because you were at Sheffield, weren't you?
I was at Sheffield. Yeah. Unfortunately, due to this, Article 14, I wasn't allowed to coach. But I was, my wife, Susie, and we had planned on attending as soon as we heard about this thing,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So, and that kind of, actually, I guess just to give your listeners some context and some history, if that's okay. So I was at the IPF Worlds in Calgary, Canada in 2018. And my wife, Susie, was the head coach of our U.S. Raw national team. And so anyway, so I had and I was Susie's primary assistant, and I had a session off when I wasn't coaching. And so the owner of SBD, Ben Banks, called me back to the booth in the back of the room, and he said, "Hey, I want to show you something." And I said, "Great." And I came back, and I don't know what he's going to show me. I'm thinking knee sleeves or whatever, some powerlifting kit or what have you. Anyway, he hands me this brochure, and I kid you not, it felt like I was looking at something that you might see in like a Rolls Royce dealership, or like a Lexus or a Mercedes. It was this high end brochure that detailed his dream of the Sheffield. And so he said, I'm going to pitch this to the IPF. What do you think? You've been around the sport for a while. And I said, I was just blown away. I was like, man, this is magnificent. I mean, first of all, you've clearly put a lot of thought and a lot of time and effort behind this. And, this is this idea that, you want to give rise to, and it's just amazing. And so I said, yeah, man, run with it. I said, look, what's the worst thing they can say is no, and so forth. Then anyway, fast forward to, Sheffield actually becoming a thing. And then of course it got postponed because of COVID and yada, yada, yada. And here we are in 2023 and you have the first one. And so Susie and I had planned to attend regardless. We were going to go at the very least and spectate. And then there was a period of time where we were going to coach. And then our lifter dropped out. And then there was the Article 14 stuff. So anyway, all that being said, yes, we attended. We sat in the front row. And of course, we were able to kind of join forces with our good friends, Jason Tremblay and Ben Escrow at the Strength Guys. And naturally, they had two athletes. They had, Leah Bavois and Taylor Atwood. And so I was sitting next to Jason in the audience in the front row. And I think some of this came through on the live stream. Jason's got his laptop there and he's crunching numbers. And I was holding this whiteboard, which has now kind of become famous because we were the theater was so immense, it was huge, and the crowd was raucous and it was loud and all that was fantastic. But because we were in a theater, communications were difficult at times. Not everybody was getting a good solid cell signal and it was difficult. We were trying to communicate on WhatsApp. And anyway, that being said, at times, Jason and I were kind of looking at it, an attempt, and I would quickly write it down on the whiteboard and then flash it up to our coach, Ben Escrow, across the way, and he'd kind of give us a thumbs up or whatever, to make sure that we were all on the same page. But anyway, that's a long way of saying that it was just a phenomenal event, and I think it really changed the landscape of powerlifting as we know it, particularly at a high level in the IPF drug tested, where these athletes are now treated like professionals. They're treated like, like legitimate athletes, like you would see in other sports. And so it's fantastic. It was awesome.
Yeah. I attended as well. I wasn't sat in the front row. I was sat a little bit further back. But I think the only way I can liken that to it was something like watching like a boxing or a UFC or wrestling. And I see what you mean about the volume, because sitting a little, I don't know where it was like right at the front, but sitting a little bit further back, the volume of it and just how the crowd was, it was constant all the time. It was probably one of the best. I mean, don't get me wrong, I followed rugby, I followed football, over in the UK, but an atmosphere like that, to sustain it for that long, I thought was really, really good. Funnily enough, there was she's actually competing in her first powerlifting competition in a couple of weeks' time. And that was the first powerlifting competition that she went to go watch. And I just said, they're not all like this all the time. And she was like, it's amazing. And I was like, it is, but maybe not as there. But then, with that, the expectations for it, I think that is because I was chatting with a couple of people who, again, it was their first powerlifting competition that they'd been to, and it just drums up that interest in to get involved.
It does. Yeah. I mean, SBD clearly, they knocked it so far out of the park, and now they've set the bar so high that it's like other, competition promoters and meet directors are now striving to kind of reach that standard or at least come close. And it's just funny that you were sitting with some people who have never been to one. And now, of course, they're like, wow, are they all like this?
Yeah.
You're like, not quite.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just touching on, because obviously the ebook that you released as well, obviously, a lot of time, a lot of effort has gone into there. Is that something that you'd always wanted to do? How did you find putting that together? How did that kind of come about?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's always been kind of this passion project of mine. I've been involved in powerlifting coaching for, 2 decades. And so, it took me a while to kind of forge my own path and find out what my niche within this niche of a sport is. And clearly game day and coaching is that thing for me. And so I've always kind of thought, there's no instructional manual out there. There's no real way of learning how to do this, other than, of course, doing and being mentored by other coaches, which is matter of factly, quite frankly, the best way, the hands-on way, you know what I mean, to learn it and to actually do the thing that you're trying to get better at. And so, but I thought, how can I pour into this passion of mine with something that I like to do? I enjoy writing. It can be obviously very laborious at times and very frustrating. So oftentimes I'll say I enjoy having written more than actually the process of writing. But so suffice it to say, I wanted to put this out, and I thought, it would lift up the community. It would give people a reference guide, if you will. I know that there's a lot of information in there, and I included a variety of topics, and it's, it can be something that you read from cover to cover, but I also wanted it to be something that people could pick up or reference, at any point in time in their powerlifting career and say, hey, I want to go to this one particular chapter on warming up and how to warm up and so forth, or how, what specific part of game day strategy, and they want to look up something that they can use it as this reference tool. So it really was the culmination of 2 decades worth of ideas that I kind of had floating around in my head. And then, of course, a lot of the data that I've accumulated and tracked over this time that I actually just wanted to, matter of factly, just publish it and put it out there. And now it's, I'm not saying this to toot my own horn, but in terms of written form, it's the only, scarcity in the marketplace kind of benefited me, because a couple of years ago, I did an online webinar series with Avi Silverberg, the Canadian national team head coach at the time, who was putting together a series. And he said, hey, I want you to help me with the game day aspect of this. So we did that in webinar format where you could log in and kind of take these classes. But I wanted to have a physical kind of tangible document that people could go back to and reference and look at. And so, fortunately, earlier this year, right before Sheffield, as a matter of fact, about a month before, and I kind of strategically released it at that time because the Arnold Sports Festival was coming up in the Sheffield, and our nationals here in the United States, and so kind of strategically released it at that time when I knew that there would be a buzz around powerlifting, and hopefully it would sell more copies. So money was never my goal, although I tell people, I'm not allergic to money. It's nice to reap some financial reward from your efforts, but honest to God, man, it's been about leaving a legacy behind, something that I poured back into the community, if you will, and matter of factly, just lifting it up by giving this educational tool to people based on my experience and expertise. So
cool. Yeah. I know for myself, obviously, since we last spoke, I've got a couple more competitions underneath my belt as a handler, which I get quite excited about, compared to myself competing. And I think from there, one thing that you mentioned, learning from other coaches, the practical side of things. For myself, I've learned from either coaches or people who have handled me, who have been in the sport a little bit longer, and just asking them and going along and shadowing them. But then also, I think I've learned a lot from actually watching other coaches at competitions, which I think is really good. And I think just one question from there is, who were kind of your influences, and how have you kind of refined your process over the years that you've been involved in powerlifting?
Yeah, so to be quite honest, I mean, my primary, and I don't want to say singular influence, but my primary influence was my mentor, who was Dr. Larry Maley, who is the president of USA Powerlifting. And so when I got my start on national teams, which was in 2003, so that dates me, that was a long time ago. Of course, it was just Equipped back then. My wife was competing, and I was her personal coach, and then kind of became this an assistant coach. So I literally and figuratively shadowed Larry. And Larry is a man of very few words. And so I learned by watching. He didn't necessarily sit down and he wasn't verbose in his instruction. He just kind of said, hey, let me take you under my wing, follow me, and I'll kind of show you the way. And so he was a tremendous influence to me, and really kind of showed me that there is a way about doing this. There is a lot of strategy involved when you can engineer a performance out of a lifter who on paper is not necessarily the strongest. And of course, that's what the sport has come to, is the fact that it truly is a sport. It's not just a test day. It's not just a max out day where the strongest person is going to win. And so Larry really kind of poured that into me, and I was groomed along under him as an assistant coach until he bestowed upon me, and the USA Powerlifting executive said, okay, you're ready. You can be a head coach. And then, of course, I kind of carried it from there. And starting back that long ago, to also kind of answer your question, is I, wasn't afforded the opportunity of watching live streams, and dissecting and analyzing performances, because we didn't have live streams, back then, and in the earlier days. I say the earlier days, but in the early 2000s and so forth, there just weren't live streams. So it wasn't as though I could go back and re-watch a performance from lifters. So I had to talk to other coaches. I had to absorb what I could absorb on game day, watching other coaches operate, how they operated, in opposition to Larry, how they operated in opposition to others, and then of course dissecting the score sheets and so forth afterwards. And that was kind of, back then, how you developed and how you refined your craft. And then of course getting into the game and actually doing the thing that you're trying to do, which is coach lifters, and just coaching, as you said, because you've been exposed to it now, you've been on both sides of it, is being on both sides of it at a variety of competitions. And so just literally immersing yourself at as many different levels of competition, from local to state to regional to national to, et cetera, all the way up to world championships and some of these invitationals, as we've talked about. And that's kind of how I perfected and refined my craft over time. Nowadays, to your point, people do have the advantage, and it's a wonderful advantage because it's one of the ways that you can learn by going back and watching a live stream. And sometimes now I'll pick a live stream and I'll just pick a lifter out of the weight class and just say, okay, that's the one I'm going to track. That's the one I'm going to follow. Let me try to call the attempts as I see them. And I know it's different watching it on video, but it's a good tool. And so it kind of, and it clues you in. And so watching other coaches that you look up to, or watching other coaches that you admire and how they make the decisions that they make. And obviously, through a computer screen or what have you, you're not always privy to all the behind the scenes information and context, but you can glean a lot of it, if you will, and learn to make better decisions that way. And so it's cool that technology, enables us to do that, when back when I started, I really wasn't afforded that opportunity.
Yeah. I think what you mentioned there about the getting experience at different competitions, I think I can 100% relate to that. I know for me, especially going from sort of, the regional competitions to the handful of national competitions that I've done, I think it is a step up in terms of, oh, wow, okay, so I need to make sure that everything I'm doing is okay, and how the competitions ran is completely different. And I think, but then you go back again and it's like, okay, so I've got a better understanding of that. One thing that you mentioned there, obviously is a sport, trying to manage the day rather than just testing your 1 rep max. Do you think that's where potentially coaches handling on the day go wrong and kind of don't try and just think, yep, let's just try and get all PBs on the board and let's just see how heavy they can lift? Is that kind of where coaches go wrong, would you say?
I think it's one of the ways that coaches go wrong. I think it's really key in that, I think the foundation of any healthy relationship, and particularly a coaching relationship, is communication, right? Mm-hmm. It's just, hey, we need to be on the same page, and I need to speak your language, as the coach. I don't want to necessarily morph you and mold you into my way of doing things. I need to be adaptable to you and to your personality and to the way that you communicate and so forth, obviously with some guidance along the way. But I think it's really important for the lifter and the coach to communicate beforehand and set some expectations and find out. And I think, to your point, I think what you're kind of getting at, those expectations, those objectives and goals clearly are going to change with the experience level of the lifter and the level of the competition. And so in the beginning, yeah, it is kind of sort of a test day. You know what I mean? It is, hey, I'm sticking my foot in the water, so to speak. I want to experience this. I want to get game day experience. I want to see what it feels like to compete and lift under the scrutiny of a strict judging of someone else's timeline. You know, I don't get to manufacture the atmosphere. I don't get to have all of my friends around me slapping me on the back, spotting me. Now I've got other people spotting. I have to go in someone else's timeline, somebody else's schedule. I don't get to pick the song that I want to listen to. You know what I mean? When I, you know, all these little things that make a difference. And so I think in the beginning, it is truly just gaining experience, going out there, trying to hit some PBs, trying to find out, hey, where is my strength level? Where am I? And gaining that valuable experience. And then as you ascend, as you become stronger, then, you know, the goals, the experience level of the athlete, all of those objectives begin to change. And so that is when it truly does become more strategy, more sport-like, if you will. In the beginning, yeah, it can kind of sort of feel like a test day. And that's not to say that once you even ascend to the highest levels at world championships in Sheffield, of course, the underlying foundation in all of this is hitting a PB, right? It's getting a PR. It's being able to lift something that you've never lifted before. And as a coach, you want to drive and lead your athlete to that point, but with the understanding that at these higher level competitions, we've got to employ some strategy. We have to be more pragmatic. It's not always swinging for the fences. We have 9 opportunities and we're trying to build a total. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's the person with the highest total that wins. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of where it changes. And it's important for the coach to meet the athlete at where they are and then help to frame and facilitate those discussions so that you develop a hierarchy, if you will, of goals and objectives for the day, you know, rather than just pouring all of your goals into this one singular outcome. You have to realize, okay, well, that one singular outcome may not always happen. So if we're more process oriented and focus on the habits and the routines and the rituals and the way about doing this thing, the outcome will oftentimes just take care of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything that you've kind of said there, you know, in my head, I'm picturing I can relate to rugby because that's the sport that I did before. Powerlifting is, you know, the coach on the side sort of being that cool head to be like, okay, this is the strategy that we're going to do, and this is the plan from there. And I think, you know, it is a lot more. I was lucky enough to do an internship with Jason Tremblay, the strength guys. Learned a lot from those, and it is, you know, the tactics of it, and, you know, being able to have that plan there on game day. Do you think that's where, well, you know, from your experience, trying to be that, you know, cool, calm, collected character as opposed to maybe at the start? I know for me, you know, I've got really excited beforehand and being like, oh yeah, we can put this on the bar. Whereas actually, sometimes it is a case of, which I've learned, and I need to stop myself getting too excited if things are going really well. Okay, let's stick to the plan. Let's build that total. We're still going to be building from there. Have you had to work on that, or, you know, especially from the mentor that you had, did you always kind of have that approach of, no, I need to make sure that I'm, you know, keeping that focus for the lifter?
Honestly, I think it's a bit of both. I mean, Larry is, my mentor was very, very quiet and very stoic. And so I really took that from him. I kind of, as coaches, you cut and paste things that you learn from other coaches and from mentors and so forth. And then you craft that into your own, recipe, if you will, and kind of build your own recipe. And yeah, I mean, I can be a very intense and emotional person as well. And I think, this is an emotional sport, you know what I mean? And people pour their hard work and effort and labor and passion into it. And so I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's important to kind of meet the lifter where they are in terms of their personality and understanding, kind of vibing off of them. You know what I mean? If you've got a lifter that is stoic and quiet and thoughtful and introspective, you don't necessarily want to be that rah-rah screaming cheerleader for them, because that could totally take them out of their comfort zone. And look, completely on the opposite side of the coin, if you've got somebody who's crazy emotional and likes to scream and likes to get fired up, then you need to be their cheerleader. You need to be their hype man or their hype woman and kind of get them fired up and meet them where they are. And so I think it's taking your personality and kind of crafting it and molding it around theirs, while also, you don't lose yourself in it. You want to still maintain yourself, but yet when it comes to making those decisions, as you said, those tactical decisions and strategy, that's where I really do kind of employ some of those stoic principles in just remaining calm and remaining focused on the objective, and the understanding that this, we have 9 attempts. This can be a roller coaster ride. Not everything is going to bounce our way. There's going to be some times when we might miss a lift, or we don't get a particular call, or something happens that doesn't necessarily go in our favor. And it comes with the understanding of, we just need to stay focused on our goal, focus on the things that we can control, rather than unraveling, if you will, because, emotions can, momentum can create, or momentum, I should say, can build positively or negatively if we let it. And so it's about kind of staying within all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a preference or a favorite, if you like, on both? Or
I'll be honest with you, man, and it's just something. It's because I'm so old and I've had so much time to coach so many lifters. I've been around literally. I've had the good fortune, and I use this example in my book of coaching my friend. Mike Tuchscherer on a number of cases. And if you know anything about Mike, he's very thoughtful and he's very introspective and he's quiet on game day. And I can remember, a handful of times coaching him, and it seemed like, honest to God, we said maybe a half a dozen words to each other the entire day. And it can be just we read each other's body language very well. And Mike doesn't need a lot of hype, doesn't need a lot of screaming. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of a nod or just a way of looking at him or something like that. And that's fun because, not a lot needs to be said. You're just focusing on the execution. He's very self-sufficient. And then I've had other lifters who, like Elaine Norton, or a Screamer Manuel, these people that get really fired up and really hyped up, and they want this, I don't want to say circus-like atmosphere, because it's not a circus, but for lack of, they want this emotion, this intensity, this tornado, if you will, this perfect storm. They want that. And so that can be pretty fun too, because you're getting fired up with them and you're getting intense with them. And so I don't know that I necessarily have a preference. Honestly, I think it's fun to experience all of those things and to kind of learn and know how to deal with different personalities. That's part of the beauty of the sport, and what the sport has given back to me is just the opportunity to meet so many fantastic people. And so obviously, thank God we're not all the same, or the world would be a really boring place. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's been really cool to work with a wide variety of athletes and a wide variety of personalities. So I take what life gives me in that way. So
I think that's what makes it interesting, because even as maybe a little bit of a tangent on this, but as a sport, everyone does squat, bench, and deadlift, but it's the personality that comes out from there. And I know we touched on Sheffield quite a lot, and for everyone listening who might be new to powerlifting, I think the personalities of the lifters came out at Sheffield. You can actually see, because there was screens coming on of like snippets of their interview, which I thought was really cool, because sometimes you'll see their lifts on their social media or anything like that, but not necessarily unless you listen to the podcasts or anything like that, and actually get a little bit more of an understanding behind them. And with that as well, I think from my own experience, the first British championships that I went to, from seeing Tony Cliff, for example, lifting for the first time, how he is, in the warm-up room walking around compared to other lifters who were slapping and hitting and getting hyped up. It's interesting to see that difference from there. From a lifter's point of view, you then find your own style, if you like, of what you want to do, which I think is important, because sometimes, like, I'm not a go crazy and slap myself in the face or anything. I've given it a go. I've tried it, but it's just not. It just doesn't. It just doesn't work. And I think, for lifters out there, and it doesn't always have to be, like that. You find your own style and how you approach it. With that as well, when you mentioned there about, being able to make those decisions, kind of like two follow-up questions from this. Do you think by having a plan and having something to focus on, does that allow you or the coach to stay focused and also manage the lifter a little bit better? And then the second part is that when it is a little bit more of a high pressure environment, or things are a little bit different, like what you mentioned about Sheffield, holding up the whiteboard, writing the pens on there, is it sometimes a case of just being able to pivot and be adaptable and just think, right, how can I, stick to the plan, but, change it a little bit so I can still focus on the lifter, if those two kind of make sense?
Yeah, they do. They make perfect sense. I think to answer the first part of your question, I think game planning is critical. It's a vital component of having a successful experience and a positive outcome. And like I said, outcomes look different for each lifter and based upon their goals and based upon the level of competition. But you don't want to go into a competition blind. You don't want to just wing it and say, oh, I'll just, kind of just go with the flow and go wherever the wind takes me. You want to have a plan in place. You want to have every single warm-up written out in advance. You want to have every single attempt or option of attempts, an A and a B, or an A, B, and a C sometimes, depending upon the strength of your lifter, and have a script. Rugby coaches, American football coaches, basketball, you name it. Coaches don't go into competitions blind. They have a script with the understanding that, hey, we need to be adaptable. We need to pivot. We were supposed to take a left turn on this play, but now we have to take a right based on what's happened and so forth. But yeah, it is really critical to have a plan in place because it does enable you to stay on task. It does enable you to stay focused in this emotional atmosphere and storm, if you will, that's kind of going on around you. And when you don't have a script in place, you can succumb to the emotions of the day. You can allow those feelings to trump your objectivity. And so, that's where it's really important for the coach to remain truthful, to remain honest to themselves, honest to the lifter, and above all else, be that objective voice of reason. Because the lifter is literally and figuratively in the battle. They're on the platform. They're in the arena. They're competing. Naturally, their emotions are going to be running high, and oftentimes they'll have an emotional attachment to a specific number, and they'll have an emotional attachment to what just happened to them on the platform, be it positive or negative. And it's imperative that the coach remain grounded, remain focused, and say, hey, this is the plan. We kind of saw this coming, or maybe we didn't even see this coming, but we've accounted for it. And so, we have a play called, if you will. We have, we've written that, that's been baked into our process, and now it's written into our script where, if X, then Y. You know what I mean? And so I think it's critical to run through those scenarios. And clearly, I think the higher level competitions you have, and the more you ascend up that competitive ladder, the more potential scenarios you can run into, to your point, at Worlds, at Sheffield, and so forth, where, at Sheffield, there's money on the line and these sorts of things. And so you can have a play call in place. So as I said before, just to kind of tie a ribbon around that piece, the game planning calls that I do with my lifters and athletes and their coaches, if I'm working with another coach and so forth, are really critical, because I try my best to leave no stone unturned. And it's an opportunity prior to the competition where we're all sitting like this, just talking across computer screens, where we're relatively unemotional. There's no adrenaline pumping, and we can be objective in this moment to kind of go through the calculus, to go through, the reasoning, the rationale behind our decisions, and have these different scenarios mapped out so that on game day, we don't succumb to that pressure, that emotion. We have a play called, and we can make a logical decision when it matters most. And so, yeah, so I think that's all critical. And then the second piece is just also be willing to adapt. Sometimes something happens, the jury gets involved on a particular lift and you didn't plan for that. And so now you have to, but once again, if you try to run through those scenarios and try to understand, okay, this could potentially happen. If this does happen, what are we going to do? It really helps to just stay in the moment and be focused and then make a logical next decision rather than being prone to error because you weren't prepared for it.
Yeah. I think from that, I think some really good points in there, and I think the key thing for me is, and I actually had a conversation about this in the gym last week about because powerlifting is quite an emotional sport. You got to get hyped up for that final deadlift or whatever, which is awesome to see. But I think when it's going into a competition, you've got a plan there. I think, as a beginner, 100% enjoy it. But I'm a big fan of an analogy. So the analogy that I used, I just mentioned, when you go into a supermarket and you're really hungry, there's no logical answer. You go in for a little bit of food and you walk out and all of a sudden you're 50 pound down. I only went in for some milk. But when you go in and you're not hungry and you think, right, what do I need to do? You stick to the plan, you stick to your shopping list, and you walk out, and it's been a successful trip. And I think sometimes it can be based off that. And if the coach and the lifter both don't do that, it's kind of, oh yeah, let's just put this on, and then that could go from the lifter having. Because I do think why we all got involved in powerlifting is because we enjoy it. It was fun, and I think that's got to be part of it. If it does go too wrong, they're not going to enjoy the day and walk away and think that wasn't a good meet. Whereas it's a different scenario if they've got an injury or anything like that. But as long as you've got that plan there, and I think what you mentioned, obviously, going in to the competition, you said about having a plan. You also mentioned there leaving no stone unturned, and I'll let you touch on this a little bit more. But again, having worked with Jason, gone through the internship, I know how much work goes on behind the scene. Do you just want to kind of what your approach is it to? And it's not just a case of everyone knows that you'll have that taper or your peak into the competition, sorry, and the prep for that is going to start in terms of what's the plan for the game day. Just want to talk through kind of your approach and how much work actually goes on before the competition day.
Yes, that's a fantastic question. And I'm glad that you mentioned Jason, because I'm going to bring him up in this conversation. Jason and I are really good friends. And I think, honestly, we have mentored one another in different aspects of this sport. And so that's been a very symbiotic relationship between he and I. But when a lifter hires us, my wife or myself, SSPT for game day coaching, the process starts the second that they reach out. And so one of the things that I do is immediately you start to open those lines of communication. And so it's like we actually have a survey that we send out to lifters who reach out to us. And of course, it's asking all of the usual information, contact info, all those sorts of things. But, and I want to know their PBs. But above their PBs, I want to know what's their favorite lift, what's their least favorite lift. I ask them questions about how they would characterize their mental state. I ask them questions. It's a pretty detailed questionnaire. Asking questions about what they feel has been the missing link for them on game day. And I also ask kind of an important question that I like to ask and frame it this way is, like if I were going to coach you on game day, Stephen, is I kind of ask the lifter, imagine what would be your perfect game day. Like, what would be perfect for you? Like, if it's going 9 for 9 and hitting 4 PBs, a squat, bench total, a deadlift and total, how would that look in your mind? And then what can Matt Gary do to help you facilitate that? Like, what is my role in helping to bring that to fruition? And I think, again, that just comes with kind of me meeting the lifter. And so that's part of our initial process is this questionnaire, is getting all that valuable information back. And then depending upon how far we are out from the competition, we begin to track along with that lifter's training. And so most of the time we are matter of factly not writing the training for that lifter. we don't do too much programming anymore. We're kind of these hired guns, if you will, to come in and help facilitate and extract, elite level performance when we can. And so, but we invite, if that lifter has a coach that they work with, then clearly we want to begin to try to collaborate with them and find out where they are in their training and just kind of track along, obviously not overhaul their training because their coaches already has a good recipe for them clearly. And so, but we just kind of track along. And then obviously as we get closer to competition, kind of that last month, like you said, during the peak and during the taper, we really want to follow along very closely. We're watching a lot of video of our lifter. We want to see how they look, how they move under load, how they grind, where their sticking points are, the type of progressions that they make, the jumps, et cetera, et cetera. And having that be kind of a collaborative process between the coach, their coach, the athlete, obviously, and then ourselves, kind of that three-headed monster, if you will. And then naturally, part of that goes into, at the higher level competitions, scouting our opposition. Yeah. And so, like I said before, kind of leaving no stone unturned, about 2 or 3 years ago, Jason Tremblay and I were just having a conversation, just a casual conversation. We were talking about, scouting other lifters and what are the things that we look for. And so we began to put our heads together and we said, let's really kind of collaborate and join our processes, if you will, into a scouting report. You know what I mean? And what are so we sat down and made a really long laundry list of all of the things that we feel are vital. And some of them we realized after the fact, that's not so important. And, but we made a list of the things that we track. And then we began to throw the data from open powerlifting based on lifters' performances into a spreadsheet, which creates this calculus. And of course, Jason is the Excel wizard, you know what I mean? And so I let him run with that because that's his area of expertise. And so anyway, we came up with this scouting report. And so we do what I like to think of as high level and advanced scouting, tracking the type of progressions that the other team, if you will, makes. What have their body weights been like at competitions? How hard are they cutting? And then obviously in this social media world that we live in, we try to follow along on social media as well, depending upon what each athlete reveals. Some obviously reveal more than others, and that's fine. But we track along with that and scouting our opposition. And then obviously, as I said before, one of the very last things that we do is hop on this call, this virtual call just like this. And the calls usually take 60 to 90 minutes. I mean, they're pretty extensive calls. And we install these game plans. And that's a collaborative process where we work with the coach, where we work with the athlete, and we say, okay, this is how the training has gone. And based upon this training data that we've accumulated, and we set and create these expectations for you. And then also based on the competition, are you trying to hit a qualifying total to get to nationals? Okay, cool. Well, if that's the case, then we're not really paying too much attention to the opposition. We don't really care where you place. We're just after this number. And so how can we engineer a performance that would get us to this point, And then other competitions and other, like nationals or world championships, those look very different. And they look different for different lifters. Some lifters who have no shot of hitting the podium whatsoever, then it does just become a matter of, hey, I want to lift well. I want to try to hit some PBs. If I can score any points for my national team, that would be great. And, sometimes you'll have a lifter who's not going to podium, but they might be able to grab a medal. You know what I mean? Like maybe a bench medal. And so you try to facilitate their performance to grabbing that one thing. And so that I would say is what the final stages of the process look like, is collaboratively installing that game plan. So we have that in place. And then obviously where the rubber meets the road is game day. And now we have this plan in place. And so we are, it's our job. I'm a tool. I'm an employee of that person. I'm being used for my expertise and my experience to help facilitate their best performance. And so I would say that that's kind of how it all looks. So it's, when people watch things on social media or they watch a live stream, all they ever see is the finished product, but they don't see the hours of preparation and the hours of effort that went into that. And so I like to think, and I know a lot of people would probably say this as well, but I like to think that, particularly myself and Jason, that we truly do leave no stone unturned. We talk to other coaches. If we can't find information on a lifter, we do some pretty extensive digging, and we'll poke around, and we'll try our best to find little nuggets, if we will, that are going to help us, stack the deck in our favor for our lifter. And so we do all of those things, and we take a lot of pride in it, and we work really hard. And so I think, what can't be measured oftentimes is consistency and effort and our preparation. And so I believe that we do that as well, and if not better than anybody else, so that we put our athletes in the best position they can be in on game day to succeed.
Yeah. What was going through my head when you were talking there was just, again, a conversation that I had not so long ago was being persistently consistent, just being able to do that and making sure that, you're getting the information that you need. I think from there as well, obviously, leaving no stone unturned, you want to go into the competition with a plan that is going to work. And I think especially when you mentioned, when you first started sort of doing game day, 2003, obviously there's a lot more data now. Social media is the all-seeing eye of everything. But with that, how what's the best way to phrase this? How sort of confident can you be with a plan going into a competition? Because, as a sport, a little bit, maybe more so in a team sport like rugby or American football or anything, people can do a moment of magic and it can change it around. Is that, similar to in powerlifting, all the best laid plans, all of a sudden, something happens? Can it ever be a foolproof plan with no stone unturned, or is it just a case of 99.9%, if that kind of makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I don't think that there's the perfect plan, and I don't think that there's a foolproof one. You know what I mean? We're not beyond reproach. We are fallible. We make mistakes. And so, but putting these plans in place, I think, put us in the best possible situation we can be in on game day. And then, but I think to get to the crux of your question, while no plan is foolproof, I think clearly we feel more confident with some of our athletes than others, and that's dependent upon that lifter. And so going into a competition, when I'm coaching on game day at Taylor Atwood, for instance, I'm going to feel a lot more confident with a Taylor Atwood in his preparation and his ability to execute, but also his mental capacity and champion's mindset and this indomitable will and spirit, if we can use that analogy, is just he can overcome tough situations when a curveball or a bad scenario might be thrown his way. And so clearly some lifters are going to make us feel more confident than others. But I think, no plan is perfect, and you have to be willing to adapt. And sometimes when the proverbial crap hits the fan and things start to unravel a little bit, it's our job to keep our head on our shoulders and keep the athlete focused on the end goal and realize, hey, this is a bump in the road, and that all comes with just focusing on the things that we can control. Yeah. And I oftentimes talk about the circle of control, and it's just about focusing on our consistency, our effort, our preparation, our attitude, our execution, and our attempt selection. And those are the things that we can focus on. And if we can just close that in and focus on those things, look, we can't control what other people are going to do. To your point, it's not like rugby, where it's offense versus defense, and we call a play, and then they're doing something to manipulate their players and their team around us. Look, this is lifting weights, and so it's you against the barbell, and it's us trying to score points via kilos, obviously, and accumulate the biggest total that we possibly can. And so, anyway, all that being said, yeah, I think the plans put us in a very good position to do all those things, but by no means is anything perfect. So, yeah.
I wanted to touch on that because I know obviously we've spoken about, how to manage it on the day, how to, have that plan in place. But I think it's important to know that, as long as you're focusing on what's the best plan you can put in place, you've done your best. It's a little bit similar to, you know, the lifter. You know, it's you against the barbell. As long as you've, you know, put that effort in. And I'm glad you mentioned, you know, those principles that you've mentioned, because you know, I think that's lays the foundation for quite a lot of things. You know, the phrase that I like is, you know, you get out what you put in, and if you put that effort in and have that and have that work in the background, you know, there's going to be some reward or a reward, you know, from that. Whereas, you know, like what you touched on earlier, going in without a plan, it's kind of, you can't expect to come away with something if you're just going in blind. So yeah, it was good to touch on that one. I think as well we've kind of gone through the spectrum of game day. You know, during the day, managing emotions, obviously the work behind the scenes, with kind of maybe looking into the future a little bit, with obviously how worlds work, how many lifters competed, with Sheffield being, you know, a competition of its kind. Already seen that, you know, it's back next year as well. How much of a not that it wasn't an important role before, but how much of a role do you think of, you know, having those meetings, collaborating with coaches, and putting a bit more emphasis on having game day coaching as it's an art, you know, it's a skill. How can you see that kind of developing with the data, with, you know, looking back over footage, going forward, as, you know, powerlifting grows as a sport?
Yeah, I think game day coaching has never been as important as it is right now. And I think that's only going to continue to become increasingly important as more people come into the sport, as the talent pool gets not only larger, but deeper in each weight class. And so it's you are matter of factly, you know, gonna have to have a team around you and a team in place and a support system. You know, nobody does this alone, and nobody succeeds all by themselves. And so, you know, particularly at the pinnacle of the sport, to your point, like the world championships, like Sheffield, like now coming soon, the world games, you know, for raw lifters, you know, when we reach the tip of the spear, the top of the mountain, whatever analogy you want to use, it becomes more and more critical to have game day coaches that are competent, that are fluent, have comprehensive understanding of all of the rules, understand how to play the game, understand strategy, clearly have a good relationship with their lifters, with the nuances of their lifter, with the competition, the flow, the timing, all of these different things. And I think it just becomes more and more important. And so I think, you know, not to pat myself on the back, but I think I probably couldn't have released this book at a better time, to be honest with you. I mean, you know what I mean? And part of that is, look, I had other things going on in life, but the fact that I released it now, and it's like, this is great. You know, the sport is essentially as big as it's ever been. It's getting bigger because of social media. More sponsors are coming in, more eyeballs are coming in, even just casual spectators that have really no interest in doing this. Just family members and friends are watching. People are watching on Eurosport and able to digest these competitions after the fact on live streams. I think it just becomes more and more important. And I think it's going to continue. I think that trend is going to continue. And so to your point, using the data, using the analytics, and look, I mean, hats off, you know, I'm not the only one doing it now. I've just had two people reach out to me. I had a guy from Finland reach out to me who has started accumulating some data on the Finnish powerlifters. And so they have kind of this track record of not doing so well, and in terms of making attempts and so forth. And so he compiled some data and he presented it to me, and he goes, hey, I'm going to pitch this to my powerlifting federation, to the executive and to the coaching body, if you will, and try to just encourage them, you know what I mean? That, hey, you have more success when you make more attempts. And this is what the data say. Like, I'm not making this up. And so I saw that, and I saw another person, Seth Howard, who's been accumulating data. And it's wonderful to see this because they're seeing the same things that I have been seeing. And so when, you know, my data set, if you will, I started I used data that I started collecting from 2000, because that's when the results are verifiable. Before 2000, the competitions get a little bit sketchy in terms of finding all of the data, and it's incomplete. So I used, my data set was I think 107 competitions from 2000 to 2022. The nice thing is that it doesn't change too much. Like you'd say, oh, well, why don't you dump another 100 competition results in there? Well, it doesn't, nothing gets changed. It's the trends. The trends are essentially the trends. And I don't know that we need to look at it anymore, but it is kind of nice to have that confirmation that other people are looking at the data and they're reporting back to me and they're saying, hey, man, I'm picking up the same stuff that you talked about in your manual. I'm finding the same results, the same trends, the same probability, and so forth. And so it's like, when you have more people doing that, I think, like I've said before, a high tide raises all boats. And so it's good that maybe I was the person who started doing that stuff. I'm certainly not the only person, you know what I mean? Because I know Avi Silverberg has done that stuff too, but it's good that other coaches are using that. And I think that studying the data and using analytics can be very helpful. But there comes a point where it's like, okay, I have the data, I have the analytics, I understand the percentages, the numbers, the trends, all of these things. But at the end of the day, I'm also coaching a human being.
Yeah.
I'm not coaching a robot. This isn't, oh, I punch in this number to a computer simulator and now the outcome to, you're dealing with human beings who are emotional and who react differently to stresses and excitement and all these different things. And so I don't know. I think that's a long way of saying that it's really cool to see the emphasis on coaching and that relationship between coaches and lifters out there, and lifters, I think now more than ever, high level lifters understanding that they do need somebody. They need an advocate for them. They need somebody in their corner to help them extract and elicit high level performance. Because I even mentioned in my ebook, I ran it through a revision and re-released the ebook, and I added a couple paragraphs, and I actually posited a question. And this was a conversation that we were having over dinner, myself, Mike Touchier, and Jason Tremblay, at our nationals in Austin, Texas in February. And we said, imagine for just a moment that there were no coaches, that every lifter who is competing goes into the warm-up room and they're the only one allowed in the warm-up area. They're all alone. And so now you have to load and lift every single warm-up on your own. You have to track where you are in the flight. You have to figure out your timing. You don't have a coach to like put liniment on your back or to go fill a water bottle, something so simple as that. You have to time all of your warm-ups. You have to get ready. You have to prepare yourself for the platform. And then, oh, by the way, you have to go in, you have to submit your attempt. And then, of course, when it comes down to deadlift, you have to track what your other people are lifting. And you have to watch their attempts while submitting a change. And then, so all that is a long way of saying is that if we stripped away coaches, if coaching didn't exist, if there was no such thing as game day coaching, I think the results would look a lot different. They would vary significantly. And that's not to say that some people can't take care of themselves, but it is to say that I think we'd see a lot of different people standing atop the podium at the end. And so I just think it's an exciting time to be a part of it. And I'm happy to see such an emphasis being placed on this one aspect of the broader spectrum of coaching the sport.
Absolutely. I think, my kind of take on that is, I think especially, as powerlifting has grown, it's kind of professional in all but name. I think the approach, exactly, when you went there about, the amount of data, what you've been seeing, the fact that other coaches are now doing that there's actually prize money involved for competitions now, how the lifters, in terms of their mindset, in terms of, how they look after their bodies and the training, how the coaches work, everything is just like up, another standard, if you like, to have it professional. Because I think even the fact that everything that we've said there, a lot of lifters, still have day jobs, they still have to take all that into account, and then the amount of work that goes in to make sure that they're going, they're putting that much, like what you said, they're putting that much effort in, and that much consistency in, that it's only from a coach's point of view, it's kind of it would be a disservice not to go in with a plan for game day. So quite a lot of topics touched on there, Matt. A couple of tangents thrown in. Really, really enjoyed chatting with you. I enjoyed chatting the first time. We've been great to catch up. But the last question that I like to ask for everyone listening, whether it's lifters or coaches, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom from everything that we've chatted about today?
Man, take-home points or words of wisdom. I guess from the aspect of coaches is to, I talked about this in the book. I intentionally made this the first chapter, and the title of the first chapter is philosophy. And I think that's the absolute foundation of all of this, of life. And I kind of said, we hear that question like, hey, what's the meaning of life? Well, to me, it's to live a life with meaning. And so I think having a personal philosophy, which can be inextricably linked to your coaching philosophy, understanding your morals, your values, and your principles. And when you can clearly define those things, have a mission statement for your life, have a coaching mission statement, even a mantra, ours happens to be upholding the standard, kind of this call to action. I think it starts with having a philosophy and understanding who you are as an individual and who you are as a coach. And when you understand who you are and what your coaching philosophy is and the things that you value, you can then begin to try to link up with people who also share some of those values, and then pour that back into them and be willing to meet them where they are. The second chapter was coaching psychology. And so that's the point that I'm getting at, is you use your philosophy and your strengths while also meeting that lifter where they are. And understanding, like I said, that you're dealing with a human being. You're not dealing with a robot. You're not coaching computers. You're coaching people. And so building and pouring into and fostering those relationships, and doing all of the things that you can do, like we talked about so many times today, just leaving no stone unturned and communicating well, can make that really just a beautiful relationship. And it can, above all, it can add so much value to your life. Like you said, this is no longer for most people a hobby. It's not. I mean, a hobby is something you kind of sort of occasionally do, maybe on the weekends or something. You know what I mean? It's like the amount of effort that people are now pouring into this, and they shape their lives around the sport, nutrition, rest, recovery, training, all these different things. And so, and like you said, it brings legitimacy to the wonderful game that is powerlifting. And so when you kind of tie all that in, I just think it's awesome to see. And I think that if coaches understand who they are, and what they stand for, they can pour that back in, and they can develop these relationships with the athlete that go beyond the platform and that will ultimately last a lifetime. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because that's what the sport has given back to me more than anything else.
Absolutely, I think that was a really good take-home point, and words of wisdom. I think it's quite. I say this quite a lot, but I think powerlifting is quite a unique sport. From top to bottom, everyone wants to see everyone do well, and I think it is definitely a powerlifting community. And obviously, we've spoken about how can we get. You mentioned stacking the cards in your favor compared to the other team, but equally, you also learn from other teams or other coaches and develop. It's quite unique in its sense from there. Thanks a lot, Matt, for taking the time to jump on. Really, really enjoyed today. If anyone has any questions about what we've chatted about today, or reach out to you or speak with you, how can people find you or reach out to you?
Yeah, thank you again, Stephen, for having me. This has been awesome. I think the two easiest ways to find me, you can find me on our website, which is just supremesportspt.com. It's got my email information on there, so you can reach out to me directly via email. And then, of course, on social media, you can find me on Instagram, which seems to be kind of the hot spot for people to congregate. It's at mlgary72. You can shoot me a DM. I answer every single DM that comes my way. So I encourage people when they have questions, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Or if you want me to respond to something, tag me, hit me up, put me in your story, whatever. I'm open to those communications because I think it also helps me grow as a person as well. So yeah, those are the two easiest ways to find me.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I'll see you all next week.